Motorcycling, it really first started for me when I was around 6 or 7 years old. My father was quite into motorcycles, and that's almost a separate story on its own, but I think quite interesting and part and parcel of my story. We used to go to a place called Brands Hatch in England. Brands Hatch was a dirt track in those days, but not quite like the dirt track we see these days. It was more grass track, not on a flat oval, but up on the side of a hill. Anyway, I was there, and my dad used to love the grass track Speedway. So that's really where it started. And I thought, geez, you know, these bikes have got no brakes, they've got no gears, and back in those days, of course, which is, you know, a good 60 plus years ago, the bikes were pretty crude too, and there were virtually every manufacturer that you could think of there. Most of them were bicycle manufacturers, as most people know in motorcycling. This is where a lot of them started, and that's essentially what they look like: bicycles with an engine in them. Anyhow, Jack Surtees sells a CC V-twin matchless, which is what he had raced once or twice, as far as I understand. And he bought it and put a sidecar on it, and that turned into our family transportation. So I learned a lot from my dad. He was in the REME, which is the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers in the Army. When he came back after the war, because he had nothing, and he had learnt a lot during wartime, and he utilised bits and pieces of garbage almost and turned them into something he needed to get the family vehicle up and running, keep it going. As I say, we had no money, so I watched my dad do this, and then he introduced me into things, you know, how to even solder things properly, soldering up a radiator of the old car. So yeah, you know, I had this all together, and it just became fascinating to me that these mechanical things could be done. So I bought this old 1938 BSA 350. I bought it for £7. It wasn't running. Took a look at it and said, well, if my dad can do this, so can I. So I started to work on it to see if I could get this thing running. Well, we did. We'd stripped the motor, and I'd rebuilt it and hand done a lot of things, because as I say, we didn't have the money, we didn't have the equipment, so a lot of it was by eye. You do the best you can. So anyhow, Dad unfortunately had died, and it was sort of upsetting because he couldn't see what I'd done with this old motorcycle and actually got it up and running. So my mum was there, and I said to her one day, I said, Mum, I got to make sure that this bike really goes well. And I couldn't kickstart the darn thing, it wouldn't start. So seeing how the guys had got their bikes running in the old days, run and bump them. Good old Ian, let's give it a good old run and bump. So she looked up the road and down the road and made sure there wasn't any vehicles coming, and I bumped this thing down the driveway. Well, I guess I hadn't learned as much as I should have learned, because the clutch would not disengage, and this darn thing started. I went down our front driveway, crossed the street, and there was an alleyway on the opposite side of the road, and there's two lock-up garages where people had some fairly expensive vehicles garaged. Oh God, I couldn't stop it. Kill switch didn't work. What do I do? Well, there was a little alleyway which went to the back of some of the houses, and well, I'll try and get down that. Well, I didn't quite make it, but I went through the fence of one of the neighbours' gardens. That stopped the bike, stopped me as well. So that was my first introduction to actually having a motorcycle. So anyway, make sure that we don't have such incidents again. So anyhow, we took the bike, and there was a lot of scrambling going on in and around Surrey and Kent, etc. So as I was growing up, I started to meet a few other guys that were riding motorcycles, and well, competition looks like fun. So we started going back and watching. You know, watching's no good. You've got to be involved. I'd bought a newer BSA B31, which I was riding on the road at the time, and I'd upgraded to riding, and I don't know, the adrenaline rush. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but I just knew I just had to carry on. So really, that's how I got into the racing side, and then I really didn't do any more than that. I met a girl. We'd been going out fairly steadily for, well, nearly 5 years, and she loved the motorbikes, so we would go to a lot of the meetings. she'd be on the back of the bike. We go to the meetings and we rode at places called, funny enough, Canada Heights, and the meetings up by the Nightingale, up by the old airports. It's great fun. Aldershot and Bagshot, which were other places that we rode on. So I guess by this time it was really ingrained. Yeah, we got married. Next phase of my life was over here in Canada. So I bought an old 1968, well in that day of course it wasn't really that old, 238cc F21M is what the model was of Kawasaki. Really quick little two-stroke. Took a look at it, bought it, and spoke to some of the guys in Kawasaki, and I found out that this was the machine they're using for the north-south competition in dirt track. Nowhere really to ride it. So the few of us got together and decided that as Dave Havel was a member of the board, the fair board in Paris, there was a bit of land down there that they decided that we could utilize, and maybe we could build a track there. That's exactly what we did. We put a 1/8 mile track in there, very grassroots start. Built the washrooms in the pits, and these pits, by the way, and this track was actually a swamp. So half of it had to be almost dewatered before we could really get going. And if there was a heavy rain, well, guess what? We had to get out of there because you couldn't race there. Anyhow, we did. We got it going, and with the few guys that were really enthusiastic at that time. And it always seems to be just small groups. Everybody else just wants to have fun, but the small groups got together and promoted and advanced the sport. I guess it was around maybe 8 or 10 guys riding when we first got into it, and I really wanted to ride Speedway, as I said, since I was around the 7 years old. So took the bull by the horns, and we started doing some major promotion of Speedway. Really got the track going. I became the president of the Canadian Speedway Racing Association. And with the help of others, of course you can't do this on your own, but with the help of others, we actually ended up with 22 to 24 riders, and you can only run a full meeting with 16 riders. That's a full meet would turn up. So for a few years there, we had the track at Paris, which was the 8 mile track. We'd run that on a Friday night. On Saturday, we'd go over to Welland, and Speedway again there on a 1/4 mile track. That was a lot of fun, much quicker. And at the championships, we would actually have 22, 24 riders turning up. We'd have guys coming up from California, many from the States and from Canada here, from Quebec. A big contingent would come down from there as well. So putting it all together, it really turned into a fantastic sport over a number of years.
What does your job entail to promote this sport?
An awful lot, actually. It's very hard to detail it, but the major thing is trying to get Speedway into magazines, get it in front of the public. By that I mean going to the bicycle and motorcycle shows, taking the bikes there, showing people what these bikes are about, because they are rather unique, as you know. Getting it in the public's eye, getting some youngsters interested in taking a look at exotic machines rather than the normal machines that you would see on the road, the motocrossing, etc., which you see on TV typically. Speedway is not really shown on TV a very great deal, so I'm trying to show people that there is a different type of sport than what they see normally, and this is what we're doing here tonight, of course, which is part of that same thing. We're showing Speedway bikes as a different machine than regular bikes that they see.
Well, what's the initial response to a bike that A, doesn't have brakes, and B, runs on alcohol, basically?
I guess the best word to describe it, and the one I hear most of, is wow, because they just don't have brakes, they don't have gears, and people just cannot comprehend that a motorcycle just doesn't have these things. We do get a good crowd. I would say the attendances now are, in the 3 figures plus, and as the track gets, of course, more known, as we promote it further, and through shows like this, through magazines, through the trade shows, etc., we hope to get our attendance up into the thousands in the next 2 years. Anyway, that's our goal.
I miss the racing now. I don't race on the track anymore, and over the years I've met quite a few people, and as I mentioned before, I have helped a few guys with their engines and wheels and this type of thing. So I decided that I've got to stay involved. went back and talked to some of the gentlemen that I had helped in the earlier days, and found out that there was quite a big need for actually rebuilding engines, but not just race engines, all types of engines. Guys would come to me now. For instance, I just done a little 1958 Ducati little 100S, which was a sweet little motor to work on, and we had to source the parts for it. This gentleman had bought this bike in 1960 in Italy, so it was a 2-year-old bike at the time, but then he left Italy, came to Canada. Bike was still there for many years, and just recently he went back over and decided he'd like to bring the bike here. Well, let's say it deteriorated a little bit over the years, so he brought me this particular one, rebuilt that for him, and he's just so happy with it that this bike is up and running again, and he must be in his late 60s, but there he is. There's another gentleman that had been very interested in bikes in a way back, as I said, in 1960, and now he's back on bikes again. So that was just one of the latest ones I've done, but since I had quit racing approximately five years ago now, I guess, I had gone more into helping people with their motors, etc. So I've been doing that over a period of time, and as I say, this little Ducati was the latest one. Did a nice 250cc Monza before that one, which was a real pleasure. The gentleman that owns that also did a full restoration on the rest of the bike, and that one I've seen, and he's brought it back and shown me what it is actually now. Just a gorgeous bike. You know, it gives me a real good feeling anyway to see these things done. And I guess one of the most interesting ones that I'm doing right at the moment, again, I guess my name was out there, and somebody got to know me, gave me a call, and asked me if I'd be interested in putting together a 1948 or 1949 BSA 350cc. And it wasn't just a regular rebuild back to an original bike. He's actually going to take this machine down to the Bonneville Salt Flats and try for a land speed record run. And he's asked me to work on the engine, get it into I'll say the right shape. And that's a real challenge, because the above sea level altitude is around 4,000 feet. This brings in a whole lot of different little worms in putting an engine together to get it to work that well with the lack of oxygen. So that's my latest project that's on the go engine wise. And then behind me here you see my Norton Commando. A little bit of a story to this one too. Although I've been in Canada since 1966 and obviously had British bikes before, I've never owned a British bike here. It's always been Japanese or European of some sort. So this particular bike was in a gentleman's house. His father had unfortunately passed on, and I had to sell the house. So a friend of mine who's a real estate agent asked me to go down and take a look at it, see if I was interested in picking up these bikes at all. Well, when I got down there, this bike, you've heard of a basket case, I'm sure. Well, this was a cardboard box case. Unbelievable. The gentleman that had owned it had taken it apart, every nut and bolt, and nothing was labelled. So it had been sitting for quite a few years and it was in quite a bad state. So I took it and decided that, you know what, I think I'm going to do this one for myself. Made the guy a decent offer for it, ended up with the bike, and that's the one I'm doing. This one I'm taking a little longer over because it is a complete restoration for the entire bike, not just the engine. But the other one I got a 1966 Honda Bentley, a 305, one of the original Honda motors. Gentleman lives up in Stouffville. I've done a couple of motors for him. He's sent this one down, would like to have this one rebuilt. So that's going to be a real nice one too, because it was another one that was left out in the field and certainly not in too good a shape. So it's again a little bit of a challenge, but we'll have that one up and running, and I know this particular gentleman will actually restore the rest of the bike as well. So it'll be a bike back from the past, back on the road. So that's really where I am these days. I do work for people on Smaller engines I don't take on the real large engines anymore. But I'll do the smaller engines for people, get them back up and running, and if people have just got a little problem with the bike, it's not running too well or whatever, I'll do some diagnostics on it for them. I do still, of course, rebuild spoked wheels for people. It's a dying art. There's not too many people around anymore that are doing it. So again, it gives me a great deal of pleasure when I get this piece of rust and rebuild it. And some of them have gone on show bikes. If you go to the January shows up at the International Centre, you'll see quite a few of the machines up there, which I'm sure a number of them will have the wheels in them that I've built for them. Actually, I've been wearing a number of different hats for the last 28 years while I've been participating in the motorcycle show. But now I get a great deal of pleasure working along with the new show owners, coordinate volunteers, the machine owners, move in and layout logistics for the entire 6,000 square feet of floor space, which is specifically dedicated to the Century of Motorcycles display. So I'm getting more people coming to me with English bikes wanting rebuilds. So it's benefiting everybody. It's just a fabulous sport, you know. Whatever you do here, you meet people, and this guy wants this done, that guy wants that done, and then you meet other people who, hey, wait a minute, you saw me 30 years ago, or I saw you 30 years ago, or whatever. And the community is just wonderful, motorcycling community, you know. When we got into the bikes, you know, I'd build an engine for somebody. They'd pop it in their frame, and then I'd see them ride it, and the whole thing sort of comes to fruition. And that's really what's kept me involved in motorcycling right the way through, from, as I say, when I was about 7 years old to now I'm a little over 70. Oh, I just have fun on the street bikes now. I just like to get on a bike every now and again and just feel the wind in my face. The bike that I'm running at the moment is a 750 4-cylinder SC. That's the shaft drive bike that Honda made with the hydraulic engine. So there's virtually no maintenance to it. 16-inch wheels. So it's a very, how can I say? It's a very versatile bike. It's basically a sport cruiser. It's very very nimble. I think is probably the right word for it. It's got lots of go. It's got relatively small flywheels. It'll rev quite quickly. So it's a great piece of fun to ride. And I built that one out of 3 wrecked bikes. So again, not all the pieces were used and back on the road, but there's another one salvaged and on the road. All my life, you know, and if anybody wants work, they can always get hold of me on the internet. If they've got a problem, sometimes I can help them, sometimes I can't, but if I can, I will.
I remember a guy wanting to put oil catchers on the Speedway bikes because this was an environmental problem, of course. Why is it an environmental problem? Well, you're putting oil in the ground. Well, yeah, but do you realize what a Speedway bike runs on? Well, yeah, it runs on with oil in your engine. Oh, yeah, except that it's vegetable oil. So if you're going to be worried about vegetable oil going into the ground, you better get rid of all this grass and weeds and food, because they just never understood, and they wouldn't listen.